Iran announced on Monday that it wants sanctions to be permanently lifted immediately. This comes as President Biden's envoy joins indirect talks in Vienna with the Iranians on their nuclear program, the first since the new, more conservative regime took power in August. Richard Goldberg is a senior advisor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Rich, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
The meeting in Vienna with Iran will be the new regime's first multilateral engagement. What prompted this latest round of talks?
Well, we've had some indirect talks now 6 times throughout the year, with the new Biden administration coming in seeking to return to the old nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA for short, since that's a mouthful. And they offered Iran to come back into compliance with the JCPOA. In exchange, the U.S. would lift all the sanctions that had been reimposed by the Trump administration. The Europeans got involved. They started brokering indirect talks in Vienna. Those went on several times with the old Rouhani government, the past president of Iran now. Iran, however, was going into an election cycle in June, elected, or as we might say, selected, not exactly a free and fair election in Iran, but the Supreme Leader selected a new president who was Ibrahim Raisi, much more conservative, as you noted, sort of a hardliner, true to the ideals of the Islamic Revolution, somebody who has a lot of blood on his hands. Back in the 1980s, was the hangman of Tehran for overseeing a lot of executions of the Iranian people, has built a cabinet of people who are under U.S. sanctions for various terrorism and other illicit activities, somebody who's still wanted by Interpol for a bombing of a Jewish center in Argentina back in the 1990s. So really a who's who of Iran Terror Inc. now in charge of the country. And they have taken their time since taking office to come back to this indirect talk negotiation in Vienna, but that is what has restarted now. Again, the Biden administration saying they want to go back to the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, despite some of the criticisms of that deal. And the Iranians now having their own new terms of what they want to see happen, which may not be exactly aligned with what the Biden administration has proposed.
So, Rich, what are the current sanctions in place against Iran, and are they effective?
Well, we still have all of the sanctions technically in force and on the table from the Trump administration, reimposing all the sanctions that came back after the United States left the nuclear deal in 2018. Those are sanctions on the central bank of Iran, on Iran's oil sector, on Iran's entire energy sector writ large, the petrochemical sector, industrial manufacturing sectors, tanker companies, shipping, ports, etc. We have sanctions on the books, at least, on most important sectors of Iran's economy, most of the banks, financial institutions, insurance companies, etc. So we have isolated Iran in the financial markets now very effectively, driven their oil revenues down, their oil exports down until 2021. What has happened, though, is that those sanctions are not enforced at this point. Part of the idea here has been to try to lure Iran back into negotiations, back into the JCPOA. And so what the Biden administration has done is sort of look the other way as China has increased its imports of Iranian oil, as petrochemical sales have increased from Iran. They've also issued some waivers to Capitol Hill, suspension temporarily of some of these sanctions to allow Iran to go into its frozen bank accounts in Asia to repay foreign debts. So this has provided a pretty significant amount of economic relief to the regime to get through 2021, and also has decreased U.S. leverage in these talks.
So what role does China and Russia play in this whole Iranian nuclear program?
Yeah, they play a pretty significant role. Obviously, 2 permanent members of the Security Council, both parties to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. China, for its part, has been importing oil from Iran for many, many years, sees it as a primary energy source, but also, more importantly, as it's built out its Belt and Road Initiative across Central Asia, now moving into the Middle East, it sees Iran as a major stop on that Belt and Road Initiative. And so they've signed a 25-year agreement to invest billions of dollars in infrastructure development, perhaps even port developments. There could be a military foothold for the Chinese in the Middle East at some point. They want to sell arms to Iran. All of that, of course, depends on the U.S. lifting sanctions, so they have a strong interest in seeing that happen. The Russians, of course, as we know, strong allies of the Assad regime in Syria, historic allies of the Iranian regime as well. They have seen this both from an economic opportunity and a strategic opportunity. Economically, they actually have been the ones to sell nuclear infrastructure to the Iranians over many years in the true civil nuclear program. We think of the Bushehr civil nuclear reactor, which is a Russian-made reactor. But they also have a large arms industry and would love to be selling arms to the regime. They've sold them air defense systems in the past. They'd like to provide conventional arms as well, again, dependent on the U.S. Lifting sanctions.
So what do you think will come out of the talks in Vienna?
At this point, it's very hard to tell. There's a lot of posturing. There's a lot of public statements that don't match what we're hearing from inside the two rooms. Of course, they're not talking directly. These are indirect talks with the U.S. in a separate room, passing messages through European interlocutors. But what it seems is because Iran has become much more confident through the year with sanctions not being enforced, the economy stabilizing, seeing the United States not so willing to use force when Iran uses force through its proxies in the Middle East, seeing no real accountability as it's escalated its nuclear program through the year, now enriching to 60% level of purity, also producing uranium metal, a key component in nuclear weapons, limiting access to the IAEA, the UN inspection team from Vienna. So I think they're actually looking to start seeing what else they can get, push the envelope a little more. How much sanctions relief can they get for how little can they give up? Something that some of us are calling less for more, where Iran will do less than it even had to do in the JCPOA, but still get more sanctions relief in return.
All right. Well, Rich, we appreciate you being on the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you.